We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel, a podcast about all things rock art. Send us your suggestions.
Hello and welcome to the Rock Art Podcast, Episode 10 with Dr. Alan Garfinkel. Today, Dr. Garfinkel talks to Dr. Chester Liwosz about how he got into archaeology, came to study petroglyphs, and his work with the Mesa Prieta Petroglyph project.
Hello out there in Archaeology Podcast land. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel. I'm the president and founder of the California Rock Art Foundation. And what we do is we identify, evaluate, manage, and conserve rock art both in Alta California and in Baja California. We conduct field trips, we have trainings, exercise, we do research, and in every way possible, we try to preserve, protect, and coordinate treasures of Alta and Baja California rock art, of which there are many and diverse. We also work closely with Native Americans and partner with them to recognize and protect sacred sites. So for more info about the fabulous California Rock Art Foundation, you can go to carockart.org. Also, I'm open to give me a call, 805-312-2261. We would welcome sponsorship or underwriting, helping us to defray the costs of our podcasts, and also membership in California Rock Art Foundation, and of course, donations, since we are a 501c3 nonprofit scientific and educational corporation. God bless everyone out there in podcast land. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel. I'm the host of the Rock Art Podcast on the Archaeology Podcast Network. Our guest scholar of today, he's a gentleman who has recently, in the past, obtained his PhD from the University of California at Santa Cruz. His current position is project archaeologist for the Mesa Prieta Petroglyph project. That's a 501c3 nonprofit with a small staff, over 100 volunteers, and they pursue a mission of recording rock art, specifically petroglyphs, and doing other sort of archaeological science, preserving the natural and cultural heritage, and engaging with stakeholders to protect and preserve and educate the general public. They also include a grade school curriculum, and all ages are involved. Dr. Liwosz has published in regional, national, and international journals on topics of archaeology and parietal art throughout the American Southwest, the North American Great Basin, and in California. His current research interests include rock art, iconography, archaeoacoustics, 3D modeling, and the methods we use to employ virtual reality for analysis and interpretation. So it's really my pleasure and honor to speak with and connect with Dr. Chester Liwosz. Chester, how are you?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Well, we're blessed to have you. I believe we're connected through this electronic tether to a place they call New Mexico. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I'm coming at you from northern New Mexico in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, which is a southern part of the Rocky Mountains.
Isn't that a wondrous thing that this thing we call high technology is allowing us to be virtually seamless and connected in this electronic platform? Well, the way we usually get started, Chester, is we ask you, of course, the million-dollar question. How'd you ever get yourself involved with this archaeology, anthropology, and the study of rock art? When did you begin to get an urge to be involved in this discipline?
I guess to start off with archaeology is I just somehow knew that this is what I wanted to do from an extremely early age. As I love to recount to my friends, I was the only kid in my first grade class who could spell the word archaeology. And of course, the British way with the AE, not the American way. So, a part of it was destiny. Certainly, I tried to branch out into other areas, into other possible futures. I tried doing technical support. In undergrad, I tried studying other subjects such as the fine arts like painting and creative writing. But yeah, it just came right back around to archaeology. I think I got introduced to the discipline of anthropology more broadly my second semester of undergraduate study at Kenyon College. And I was about halfway through the term of my first archaeology class. So, of course, just an intro to archaeology. Halfway through my second term of freshman year, and I declared the major like that. I knew that this is what I was really passionate about.
So this was your undergraduate degree. You were at a place called Kenyon College, is it?
Yeah, as we like to joke, not near Uganda.
Where was Kenyon College? In what part of the country?
It's a small liberal arts school nestled in the deciduous forests of Ohio along the Kokosing River.
Oh, my word. Okay.
Yeah, named after one of the biggest early donors to help found it back in the 1800s, Lord Kenyon.
Oh, wow. So that certainly puts you in an interesting piece of geography. So I presume you obtained your bachelor's degree there?
Yeah, I obtained my bachelor's degree with a major in anthropology, earning honors, actually. And so I did my honors thesis on household archaeology in central Honduras. So certainly a very different type of archaeology.
And tell us a bit about your adventures in Honduras. What were you specifically studying? What period of time? And what did you learn and discover from your efforts?
That's a life-changing experience. It was my first meaningful excursion outside of the Midwest. I was almost in tears when it was time to go home a month after I had originally planned to return. So we were on a recurring project. It had been running for about 25 years. That every other year it was run as a field school by Professors Edward Shortman and Patricia Urban, who I believe just recently retired from Kenyon. And so they had been studying classic period, as in Mesoamerican classic period, Lenca sites, which were an ethnic group whose range was pretty much on the southern edge of the Maya world. So they had very strong interactions with the Maya sphere. So, yeah, this was a project that had been running for about 25 years.
So these were agriculturalists, were they?
Yeah, agriculturalists.
And when you said household archaeology, yeah, please, go ahead.
So, yeah, the site that I worked on during the field school was along a river called the Chamelacone River. At one point in the 90s, they wrote that it was peripheral to a more urban center called Naco, which is essentially the next major classic period urban center south of Copan. And of course, then you have this sort of ethnic change when that happens. So I wasn't working in the major center, but the site that I was working on was like right on the river and all sorts of adventures every day. We stayed in a rather small town called Pueblo Nuevo, which was 500 years old. Of course, it was so named because it was immediately adjacent to a much older town that was the post-classic settlement after another major urban center called El Coyote was abandoned at the end of the classic period. So it was actually a very interesting dynamic because as students of the field school, we worked with laborers from the local community who were very likely direct descendants from the sites from the people who built the sites on which we were working.
How exciting. Sounds really wonderful. So what touched you so deeply in terms of that month working for your honors thesis?
Well, I mean, I guess I was down there for 6 months, which I was only supposed to be down there for 5. Right. Yeah. I mean, like I begged to stay more than once, but, one extension is good enough.
So what did you do after you received your bachelor's degree? You had a 6-month stay down in a remarkable place. And then what? And
then I started doing CRM archaeology out in the Great Basin. So I was actually applying for work in the Southwest thinking like, oh, Southwest, that's like, the Mesoamerica of the United States, right?
So to those that are listening, CRM stands for Cultural Resources Management. And that's a bit of public archaeology, compliance work in the vernacular, correct? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that for the audience. Yeah, so I got work as soon as I finished my degree, and just kind of shipped out with whatever I could pack in my car, and kind of did the nomad lifestyle throughout Nevada, Utah, and then kind of began orbiting California for a while. And yeah, so then I was doing CRM archaeology in Great Basin, Nevada, Utah, California, and I was able to find my way to the Park Service, first the National Park Service in a seasonal position, and then with the California State Parks in a more semi-permanent sort of position after that.
And during that period of time when you were working in CRM, what experience did you have that really affected you, or you felt was the most significant and interesting sort of association that you had in terms of that time?
Well, not including the stories of how we'd party at the end of the project or the end of the week during the project, but
exactly. No, just from the discovery side and the interesting side, what part of all that really touched your soul and had some interesting implications for your future?
Well, I think there were some excavations on some historic homesteads in Utah that felt very significant to me at the time, personally, and there was some great preservation of wood below the ground level. But while we were doing that, as it turns out, on the commute from our hotel to the work site each day was a rather well-known petroglyph site called Parowan Gap. And so we stopped and checked that out a few times, and that was my first real exposure to petroglyphs in North America.
Well, of course, I've had the honor of touching bases and visiting Parowan Gap when I was in that part of the country, and that's a rather remarkable site, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly is. And it's amazing, as I continue my petroglyph research and I try to trace out various topics related to rock art, every now and again find a thread that goes right back to Parowan Gap. And yeah, it's a pretty significant place for sure.
Now, the rock art there is I think predominantly abstract, but I believe it's an archaeoastronomical site, and I believe it has depictions of certainly some animals. I know bighorn sheep are certainly characteristic as well, but I do understand that is a very significant place, sort of for the landscape terrain in that part of the world, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And another motif that stood out to me, I've heard interpreted various ways. It's kind of, some people have interpreted it as sort of enclosures or corrals for sheep hunting, but others have interpreted it as like genitalia, yonis. So, but yeah, primarily abstract images. So that was my first experience with rock art, but I didn't really, it does kind of show how sort of like cryptic it can be. We can throw all these interpretations at it, and it's kind of interesting how you can have different ways of interpreting the same symbolism. And so, that's the kind of thing that really drew me in. I got a lot more experience with rock art when I was working with the Park Service out in Death Valley.
I see. So where did you go after your CRM stint? Did you then do your advanced degrees after that?
Yeah, and I kind of, in a misguided way, thought like, oh, I'm writing all these reports and and starting to do like much of the legwork for the projects, so I might as well get a degree out of doing that same stuff, right? Yeah, little did I know how much grad school really is, how much hair pulling, how much stress, how much... I don't regret it. I wouldn't undo the decision. I just think I wasn't clear on what I was getting into. But yeah, that was how I decided to go to.
You didn't want to know quite that much about it, did you?
It's not what I was aiming for at the time.
Right. So you ended up at UC Santa Cruz, did you not?
Mm-hmm. Go banana slugs.
And that's what. So I guess you then received your master's and PhD there, correct?
Both, yeah.
Both, okay. And I think in this next segment, with your permission, I think we'd like to focus on the dissertation research that you've done that I think has quite a bevy of different rock art metaphor and theoretical implications. Do you agree?
Yeah, perfect transition.
Yeah, so the timing is perfect, and we quickly moved to UC Santa Cruz and the graduate efforts of Chester. And I'll see you after the break.
Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code ROCKART. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode.
Welcome back to the Archaeology Podcast Network. This is the Rock Art Podcast. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel, president of the California Rock Art Foundation. And we have as our guest scholar today, Dr. Chester Liwosz, who's coming to us from New Mexico. And he's going to talk in this next segment about his dissertation research and the journey of graduate school. Chester, it's all yours. Paint me a word picture of your experience. It's always an adventure, isn't it?
It certainly was. Grad school was a whole lot of surprises and twists and turns. And I think with the dissertation, I went in a completely different direction from what I had initially aimed to do. So my earliest experiences in archaeology were in Mesoamerica. So when I applied to grad school, I thought, well, this is my opportunity to get to do some research out of the country again. And I was trying to get connected with some folks working down in Mesoamerica. And in fact, I did get connected with some projects down there. So I checked those out during my first summer break and decided that for a number of reasons, things just wouldn't line up to make it into an ideal dissertation project for me. So I spent much of my second year in grad school kind of going through sort of an academic identity crisis of like, oh gosh, what am I going to specialize in? What am I going to write about? How am I going to finish this degree on time? So I kind of turned to some of my pet projects. It turns out at the end of my first year of grad school, there was a rather interestingly formatted class that I took that was taught by Professors Judith Habeck-Mosch and Danilin Rutherford, who's now with the Wintergren Foundation, I believe. So it was a very non-conventional archaeology class, but we had to develop these sort of class projects and think about our projects from a variety of different theoretical angles based on the theories, the very different theories and authors that we had read throughout the term. I had chosen rock art for that one, not because I had yet developed the passion for it, but because I was still sitting on some data. Because of my time that I had spent working for national and state parks in California, I had all sorts of photographs from sites that I thought I knew them pretty well at the time. Turns out that, that's like saying that your cashier at the grocery store register pretty well because you exchanged 5 words. So
exactly.
Yeah. So I had this kind of class project that I decided to do petroglyphs.
Got it.
Mostly because I was just sitting on data, and I didn't have any other kinds of data sets that I could work with on a class project.
When you say you were sitting on data, this must have been from your time being employed from, I guess, the National Park Service, was it? In that part of Eastern California they might call Death Valley, or is that incorrect?
Yeah, yes, that, and with California State Parks, because I was based out of an office that served the southern half of California.
Oh, so perfect. So you're able to segue from cultural resource management, use the data and the interest that you have in the pre-existing associations for a focus of research.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't leave us hanging. Tell us where you're working and what you were doing.
Like I said, I had some data from some petroglyph sites, and so I kind of spun up this new project proposal of like, okay, so this Mesoamerican project isn't going to work out, but like, hey, I happen to know where some petroglyph sites are, and here's some of the cool things. I had, of course, read some of your work. I had been referred to some of the work of David Lewis Williams and, of course, David Whitley. I don't recall if it must have been you who introduced me to Stephen Waller's research. So
he was one of our previous guests here on the Rock Art Podcast show. So that's a great segue, certainly.
That kind of got the wheels spinning about like, okay, well, it'll be cool to, look at these motifs that you all are talking about, from the bighorn sheep to the geometric images, to investigate the sound. And then I got into the 3D side of things. So my two dissertation sites ended up being, one was on a parcel of BLM land near Little Lake, and the other was on national park land in Death Valley.
And so tell us a bit about the actual landscape context, the geomorphology, the landform itself, if you would.
That's what made it so difficult, because these are canyons. And so if you're trying to map it with a GPS, the moment that you get inside, like the walls are blocking the entire signal. And so either you get no signal or you get an accuracy that's completely useless, like 20 or 30 meters. Yeah, that geomorphology was really amazing. It was also very disorienting, both on the human level and on the technological level. And so I got into this whole 3D modeling thing as a sort of mapping exercise.
Tell us about the geological context of your site in Death Valley. I know it's called Slot Canyon, but what does that mean? What is a slot canyon?
So a slot canyon it's an incredibly narrow canyon where the walls are substantially higher than the canyon is wide, and so you get very little view of the sky above. I think Slot Canyon is often used interchangeably with Box Canyon, but I've also heard Box Canyon used to describe some wider canyons that are not necessarily quite as narrow as a Slot Canyon. And when I say narrow, I mean in both of my research sites, there were places where you kind of have to like turn your body sideways to pass through, especially the Death Valley one. There were some really narrow passages. And then on top of it, I don't think that this is necessarily inherent to being a slot canyon, but it seems very common for slot canyons, is that there are very steep vertical changes. If I can just, I'm actually flipping through the dissertation right now to look at how high this Death Valley site was. Oh, here we go. Here's the cross section. We got, see here, 50, 100, 150, 160 meter change from the mouth of the canyon to the top of the canyon over about half a kilometer of length. So yeah, the highest vertical drop was about 18 meters, which is about 60 feet.
Wow. So it's very precipitous. It has a lot of change. It's narrow. And I presume it goes through some sort of a volcanic landscape. Is that correct?
The site that I went to near Little Lake did. It cut down through basalts that had erupted out of the Coso volcanic field, which for those of our audience who are rock art enthusiasts, the word koso, and you just start salivating, right?
So what kind of stone is it?
It was limestone, dolomite, marble, sandstone,
Oh, my word.
and quartzite. So it was sedimentary marine layers, some of which had undergone some level of metamorphosis.
So you had quite a bevy, a panoply of earthly delights there in terms of the lithic landscape. Where was the rock art physically ensconced in this slot canyon?
Mostly on the limestone / marble, a little bit on the dolomite. The dolomite wasn't really the right texture for rock art.
Mm-hmm.
You could tell that they tried to make petroglyphs on it, and they did utilize some of the more crystalline veins within it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly wasn't the preferred material.
Was it associated with a natural tank? Was it high on the cliffs? Was it at the bottom? Was it all over? Was it concentrated in certain areas?
Down towards the bottom of the canyon.
Okay.
The petroglyphs did extend from the mouth of the canyon all the way to the head of the canyon. They were more concentrated in the lower half of the canyon, which led me to conclude that the traditional ancient approach to this place was to approach it from the mouth and to climb up in rather than to drop in from the top. Most of the petroglyphs were within reach of someone standing on the floor of the canyon. However, there were ones that were rather significantly high up on the walls. And I don't have necessarily good measures of exactly how high they went because of I didn't want to risk my own safety. Some of the places where they went up into was like, I'm just going to estimate the position of that one because it would be very difficult to be up there and hold any kind of tool in your hand and still maintain a grip, which makes it all the much more impressive that they clearly did exactly that to make the petroglyphs.
The subject matter of those glyphs were?
I think it changed somewhat over time. The oldest petroglyphs, and this is based on, so I adapted a method first developed by, I believe, Amy Gilreath, called the Rough and Ready Index, which basically compares superimposition and repatination to create, that there are obviously certain caveats to this. Different facing surfaces and different amounts of lichen colonization change the rate of repatination. But it's still like a decent way to do relative dating with sort of a seriation exercise. And so what I found is that this gives you a sort of composite age index for every glyph that you can apply it to. Now, not every glyph was superimposed. That's fine. Just assign it a value of 0 for that. Out of over 400 images, about 346 of them I could say with enough confidence, like, yes, this is definitely on this level of superimposition, and or that I can tell the repatination. The oldest composite images, which were very few, out of that 346 that had a composite age, about 22 came from the oldest composite age group, and those were pretty much entirely abstract images.
I see.
The sort of mid-range of composite values, that's where we see this addition to the visual lexicon of more iconic or figurative images, or as many will conventionally call representational images. So that's going to be that's going to be your bighorn sheep. That's going to be your recognizable human figures, and your other sorts of wildlife. So there were roughly 150 of those, just over 150 of those. And so those definitely showed this shift in a shift towards these more figurative or representational images, with some of those abstract geometric forms were still there, but there were fewer of them proportionally compared to the previous time period.
What did you discover in your research in terms of perhaps a function, metaphor, significance of the site to what you might have hypothesized in terms of the native perceptions?
I think that there's, based on the acoustics, there are three different acoustical zones. The lowest one is audible to the landscape surrounding the canyon, but the upper two are not. So going back to the ethnography and then looking at the iconography as well, I interpreted the lower zone to be associated with boys' coming of age rites. Specifically, there seemed to be some multi-element compositions that seemed to be direct references to the coming of age story.
Wow.
Versus the middle of the canyon and towards the head of the canyon, I interpreted to become progressively more sacred spaces and to become sort of like, okay, the boys doing their coming of age thing might be in the lower part, but they're probably not coming up further than this. And that's also based on just the density of petroglyphs. When the density drops off, it seems that the space becomes more exclusive access.
Sure. And then moving back over to, I guess, Little Lake Fossil Falls, you began to do some very interesting studies there. We have about a minute left, but I thought you could at least touch on some of the discoveries you made there.
That was also an interesting site. The petroglyphs were concentrated more towards the head of the canyon versus there weren't really any down in the lower part towards the mouth, even though there seemed to be some significant acoustics down towards the bottom. But this actually kind of makes sense in the context of the archaeology there, because there's a village site right up there at the head of the canyon. And so that seems to be the more traditional approach. So for that one, the traditional approach is from the top in versus the Death Valley one is from the mouth up.
Oh, well, that does it for this segment. And in the next segment, I think what we're going to do is talk a bit more about some of our doctor's current exercises in a place called Mesa Prieta. See you on the flip-flop.
This season, Instacart has your back to school. As in, they've got your back to school lunch favorites like snack packs and fresh fruit. And they've got your back to school supplies like backpacks, binders, and pencils. And they've got your back when your kid casually tells you they have a huge school project due tomorrow. Let's face it, we were all that kid. So first call your parents to say, I'm sorry. And then download the Instacart app to get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes all school year long. Get a $0 delivery fee for your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
Welcome back to the third and final segment of our Archaeology podcast network. This is the Rock Art Podcast Show. This is your host, Dr. Alan Garfinkel, and we are honored to speak with Dr. Chester Liwosz, who's going to share with us in this final segment some of his current activities on a remarkable site in Mesa Prieta, New Mexico. Chester, how did you glean or gain a foothold after your PhD from UC Santa Cruz, jumping over to New Mexico?
Maybe a little bit of a wish finally fulfilled, whatever that shooting star that I was wishing on back when I wanted to make it into the Southwest, it finally paid out.
Uh-huh. Fantastic.
Yeah, there was a little bit of luck involved. After finishing my PhD, I did pick up some more CRM field work, and that was all temporary. So I was looking for something, and I decided I was going to look sort of around the general vicinity of, the region, same region at least, as the office headquarters of the company I was working for, figuring worst case scenario, if I only find something temporary, then I go back to work for them in the summer, right?
Right.
As it turns out, Mesa Prieta was like right in that zone, and it's also in the same geographic region that my advisor and plenty of my colleagues at UC Santa Cruz had studied in. So they've done a lot of research combined here on especially the Rio Grande, the northern pueblos, and the interaction between the northern pueblos and the plains.
So you had some pre-existing knowledge or some sort of context in terms of your associations with some of your peers and the educators, the professors. And so you at least knew, at least remotely to some extent, what you were getting into from the standpoint of archaeology, anthropology, and the cultural context. So give us a thumbnail sketch of where Mesa Prieta is and the kind of association What exactly is it that exists there to retain you, and what kind of organizational structure is it?
This is one of my more practice spiels. So Mesa Prieta is a 12-mile long or 20-kilometer long mesa of about 32,000 acres that sits at the exit of the Rio Grande Gorge out onto the Espanola Valley, stretching from the small town of Velarde, which is at the mouth of the Rio Grande Gorge, down to the current-day pueblo of Okeowinge, which is a Tewa pueblo. One of the things that really attracted me and that retains me is that to date, we've recorded over 60,000 petroglyphs here. Of course, I'm still relatively new with the project. I've only been here for a little over a year. This project has been going on for some 21 years now. So they hired me as a part of their celebration of their 20th anniversary. I've had a dedicated group of volunteer docents and recorders, and especially the recorders are out documenting these every weekend, almost all year long, as long as there's not too much snow on the ground. And so they've been chipping away. It's incredibly dense, very densely concentrated, but also very prolific in the sheer number. I would say if you would look at Petroglyph National Monument, I think that they tout somewhere between 20,000 and 25,000 elements. We've recorded 60,000. We're estimating at least 100,000. I was very skeptical of that when I came on board, but we definitely went over the documentation we have, our survey coverage, and it works out pretty good. We've got a lot. I tend to liken it to like the Coso of New Mexico and the amount of rock art and the history.
When you have that kind of density, what kind of an area, if you were to give me sort of the square mileage of the region that's called Mesa Prieta, those rock art images occur in what sort of a size area? What's the footprint of the region that you're looking at in square miles?
I'm gonna have to do a little bit of conversion here. I only know it off the top of my head
please.
in acres.
Yeah.
Okay, so 50 square miles is the size of the mesa itself.
Okay.
There are 2 escarpments on it. So it's shaped like a canoe. Mm-hmm. There's 2 escarpments, one on the northwest side and one on the southeast side. The one on the southeast side is about 6,000 acres, or a little under, somewhere between 9 and 10 square miles.
So these images are very, very highly concentrated in a very, very small area by comparison, correct? And who owns the land?
It's a patchwork. So a part of the mesa is owned by the Bureau of Land Management. Another part of the mesa, several thousand acres, are owned by what had been a gravel mine. Much of that is now, the mining is paused on most of that, thanks to the Petroglyph Project and educating the mine owners and operators on the significance of the petroglyphs so that no further ones would be destroyed. And then there's a patchwork of smaller private plots. In addition to that, there's about 188 acres that is in the hands of the Archaeological Conservancy, managed as a unit called the Wells Petroglyph Preserve. And so typically we would be open to doing public tours on the Wells Preserve. We have established public tour trails. So when we are open, we're only open to docent-led tours. Unfortunately, of course, because of, it's hard. COVID-19 pandemic has impacted everything, right? So We're not currently open for tours. We are hoping that we can implement the safety measures to open for that. But, we don't know exactly when that's going to be or exactly how the pandemic is going to evolve from month to month.
You're employed by a nonprofit organization, am I correct?
Yes.
And how old is that organization? It must be about 20 years old or older, right?
Yeah, it was established in 1999. And so, like I was joking, they hired me as their 20th anniversary gift to themselves.
Do they have many other employees or are they rather limited?
We have 2 full-time employees and 2 part-time employees, so it's a small office.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really amazing, and it opens the door for so many research opportunities because, like I said, we have, 50 square miles of mesa. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's the escarpments, and there's all sorts of landforms on these escarpments. The mesa is high enough to be a mountain in its own right. So in many ways, there's any sort of terrain that you could really ask for on the mesa. And that creates so many opportunities for, asking questions about land use, about how the landscape informs what sorts of petroglyphs are made where and why. So lots of research opportunity.
So give us a word picture of what we could see if we went there, and tell us about the 2, of course, $1,000,000 questions. How old are they? And what do they mean?
Oh, that's easy. We have, I would say that the bulk of our images are figurative, or again, if you prefer the term, representational. But even the themes in those are very fantastical. So we seem to have images of ritual specialists in a transformational state. This is kind of indicated by the iconography. So some of these figures might have heads with no faces, bird feet, ritual implements in their hands. I'm sure that picture sounds kind of familiar.
Yeah. So I think you're talking about animism and shamanism, of course, so our audience can get a sense of kind of the platform, and you can elaborate, of course.
Yeah, certainly. And we also have significant evidence of ceremonialism. Some of our denser concentrations seem to be in areas that would be great for hosting processions. And some of the panels do seem to indicate these processions where we have figures with dressed in elaborate regalia with what seem to be like exaggerated weapons, including exaggerated projectile points, exaggerated clubs or axes, accompanied by animal flute players. So it's an animal playing a flute. Some of these are people playing flutes. Some of them are somewhere between an animal and a person, what we call a therianthropic figure, or simply an animal human. And some of the compositions are done in like almost a linear arrangement, or there are tracks going from panel to panel that kind of show that there's a sort of path or track or procession going along this space.
So based on the archaeology and the archaeological traditions, what particular style and ethnic affiliation might these rock art pictures be associated with?
Some of our petroglyphs were used by Polyshavsma to help define the Rio Grande style. Of course, what you see here is a little bit different than what you see further south, say around Albuquerque, which is sometimes also called the Rio Grande style. But for the most part, there's certainly a lot of, even though there are different ethnic linguistic groups along the Rio Grande, and those have shifted in the last, several hundred to 1,000 years, there has been a sort of continuous contact between these groups to exchange information and, of course, religious ideas. So we shouldn't be too surprised that there's a lot of similarity still in the style that we're seeing down there versus up here. But we've got a little bit of distinctiveness of our own. And one of those distinguishing things about Mesa Prieta is that we have an unusually high number of animal flute players, or animals seeming to participate in these sort of ceremonial scenes. Fascinating. Yeah.
Has there been any ideas, hypotheses, or particular metaphors that trend, that theme would elicit from scholars and other people who have studied the rock art?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of ways you can look at this. Certainly, if you're going to go from the shamanism angle, then you could interpret animals, and particularly the therianthropic animal humans, as sort of transformational characters, as they're sort of entering into a trance state. But that's only, of course, one theory. So we should consider other perspectives too. So these could be mythological figures, or they could be animals that are particularly symbolic of something else culturally significant. So we do see, for example, I can't think of like a turkey flute player, but we do see a lot of turkey images. And that can be a reference to the use of turkey plumage as a sort of a colorful adornment on ceremonial regalia. So that's another consideration we can make. I realized that I missed answering your question about the age. So yes. The bulk of our images, they're almost 80% are Rio Grande style. So we assume those to be Puebloan. And we know ethnographically that the population boomed somewhere around 1300 to 1350 as a group ancestral to the current day Tewa immigrated to the area from the Mesa Verde region at the end of what over in Mesa Verde is called P3, what here we call the Coalition period. And that migration really kicks off what we call the Rio Grande Classic period, which is roughly equivalent to Pueblo IV anywhere else. So probably the bulk of our images are from the Classic period. Not quite all of the Pueblo style are from the Classic period. We do see some starting to show up in some small villages during the developmental and coalition periods, so basically Pueblo II and Pueblo III. We also have a strong archaic tradition, but the archaic petroglyphs, and this is still a matter of debate within our organization, according to our database, there are about 0.5% of archaic images. I would probably modify that to a reasonable estimate of the full bulk of our petroglyph inventory. Probably about 5% are archaic. On top of that, we have artifacts going all the way back to the fluted point tradition. So there's clearly a Paleo-Indian presence.
13,000 years worth of prehistory just arrayed there, even if you only have the most intensive expression seems like it's rather late in time, as you said, post 1300. What an amazing outdoor laboratory. Well, Dr. Liwosz, I am honored and pleased to have you sort of quickly go through and provide us with sort of the high points of your life in a very short hour-long escapade. And I hope you've enjoyed spending time with us and recording this to our audience. Quite a blessing, I would say.
It passes quickly, but it's been both my pleasure and I'm also honored for the invitation to participate. So thank you.
Yeah, and I learned a tremendous amount from you about Mesa Prieta and also about your own journey from anthropology and archaeology through the academic world and then back into cultural resource management of sorts.
When the pandemic is over, you got to come out here.
Yes, I would love to see some of this. Sounds very phenomenal and absolutely remarkable. And I'm sure that we can collaborate on a variety of research questions. My mind is going a million miles an hour now that you've painted some of these word pictures of some of the images. So thank you, audience, for listening for the full hour and partaking in the mysteries of rock art. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. You can find this podcast on the educational podcast app Lyceum, Lyceum, and wherever you find podcasts. Find show notes and contact information at www.arcpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.
America. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By honoring your sacred vocation of education, you impact your family, your friends, and your community. At Grand Canyon University, our online bachelor's, master's, and doctoral education degree programs allow you to balance online coursework with observational and hands-on experience in the field. Find your purpose at GCU. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.